Chapter 14. A Frightening Message. At once, Nancy dropped to her knees and felt John Wade's pulse. It was a little weak, but steady. "He's only unconscious," she reported. In the meantime, Bruce had thoroughly examined the pony. "She's got a nasty bump on the head, probably from a stone. But I think she'll come around. I'll run back to the plane and get my first aid kit." When the pilot returned, he took a restorative from the kit, broke it open, and held it under John Wade's nostrils. Almost at once, the man shook his head, then opened his eyes. A bit dazed, he looked up at the couple. "Thank goodness you're all right," Bruce said, and moved over to give the pony the same restorative treatment. 15 seconds later, the animal snorted, then started to get up. She did not rise on the first attempt. Apparently, she was still weak. It took several tries, but finally she staggered up. "You're going to be all right, little gal," Bruce said, patting the animal's neck. "I'm glad of that," John Wade said. He did not endeavor to stand up, preferring to regain his strength while still seated. He asked Nancy and Bruce to sit down with him so he could tell them what had happened. "When my pony and I reached the top of the hill, the earth suddenly gave way. There was a small landslide which carried us down to the bottom. We banged our heads and passed out. But how did you happen to be here?" he asked Nancy and Bruce. They told John Wade about their forced landing. Then Nancy added, "I have a surprise for you, Mr. Wade." She smiled. "I'm sure you're going to be delighted to hear it." She related her adventure in the cave, the scurrying of the mice, and the shower of oil, which started and stopped abruptly. The oil seeped into the ground rather quickly, but left enough on the floor to make it slippery. "It's too bad I didn't bring a sample to show you." During her story, John Wade kept staring at her and listening intently. Finally, he said, "Oil? I can't believe it. There must be a most unusual formation in that hillside." He stood up, all his vigor restored. The prospector turned to his pony. "Let's go back and see that place ourselves. Why, there may be a fortune waiting for us." Suddenly he stopped and looked at Nancy. "But I don't deserve this oil. You discovered it." Bruce spoke up. "That's right, finders keepers." Nancy surprised Mr. Wade by saying, "I'm the daughter of a lawyer, and I've picked up a few ideas from him. The oil I found was not from underground, but overground, so to speak. Somebody must own that hill, but I'm sure you could make an arrangement with the person to share the oil. Of course, I believe some of the profit has to go to the government." John Wade shook his head. "You're quite a girl," he said. "But I still say you're the finder, not I." Nancy immediately set the man's mind at rest by telling him she was not interested in sharing any profits from her discovery. "It was an exciting adventure, and that's all I care about." Bruce asked the prospector if he really felt well enough to travel. "Your pony seems okay," he added. John Wade laughed. "I feel fit as a fiddle." Nancy and Bruce decided to leave. They said goodbye and wished him luck with his oil venture. The couple walked to their plane and flew back to Excello. As they went toward the area where Bruce's car was parked, they saw Hal Calkin coming toward them. He stopped and grinned at Nancy. In his rapid speech, he said, "What'd you do to yourself, fall in an oil barrel?" Nancy's eyes sparkled. Speaking as fast as he did, she answered, "No, a lot of mice and I took a slippery trip." Bruce roared with laughter, but Hal merely stood there, looking puzzled. When Nancy reached the Hamilton ranch house, she decided to go up to her room through the back door to avoid being questioned by other people. When she reached it, no one was there. Apparently, Bess and George were not back from their horseback riding trip with Chuck and Range. During the past several hours, the cousins and their escorts had been having an unusual adventure of their own. For a while, they had followed the well-trodden trails. Then the boys suggested going up a hillside and into a grove of aspen trees. "There's a spring of delicious water in there," Chuck said. "Wonderful," Bess replied. "Why don't we eat our lunch by the spring?" The others agreed. They took the saddles and other gear off their ponies and hung them on limbs. The animals were tethered on long leads. George was amused at the antics of her mount. Finding himself free, the pony jumped up and down several times, then lay on the grass and rolled over and over. Bess giggled. "Wouldn't you think he had enough exercise climbing that hill?" Her horse was standing perfectly still. He put down his head and seemed to be going to sleep. "Chuck," Bess asked, "what do you call a horse's siesta?" Chuck shrugged and grinned. "I guess only Spanish horses are allowed to have siestas. American ponies just take a rest." The others laughed, and Bess said, "I stand corrected." The saddlebags containing the riders' lunch and thermoses of milk were opened. The little group sat down, facing the direction from which they had come. The panorama before them was intriguing. Hills and valleys were interspersed. Off in the distance, the young people could see the great cloud. "I wonder how Nancy made out," George said. "Let's hope she picked up some good clues." Range said, "What's a good clue as opposed to a bad one?" Bess and George looked at each other. They had never thought of this, but finally George said, "I suppose a bad clue would be a misleading one." "I see," he said. "A good clue would lead you right to the bad guy." Bess and George smiled and agreed that a good clue eventually led to the villain, but sometimes the way was not very well marked. But Nancy Drew is the kind of detective who doesn't give up until a mystery is solved, George explained. By this time, lunch was spread out, and the picnickers helped themselves to ham and cheese sandwiches, coleslaw, big pieces of angel food cake, and milk. "Do you think Roger Payne will ever be found?" Range asked. "I hope so," George answered. "But it seems very strange to me that he has never communicated with anyone, and yet we know he didn't have a plane accident." Bess added, "Which means, as Nancy suspected, that he must have been kidnapped." Both cowboys said they thought it unusual that no demand for a ransom had been received if Roger had been abducted. George replied, "There may have been some reason other than money for kidnapping him." "Like what?" Chuck asked. Before anyone could answer, there was the crackle of twigs behind them. The four young people turned around quickly. A man, his big hat pulled low, ambled toward them. Bess, George, and the boys jumped up. "Who are you?" Chuck called out. The plodding figure came on without replying, but just before reaching the group, he raised his hat. "Ben Rowell!" Bess cried out. Under his breath, Chuck asked Bess, "Is this the man you think planned to kidnap Nancy the night of the masquerade?" "Yes," she replied. George wondered why the Hamilton ex-cowboy had dared to appear. He must know by now that he was liable to a prison sentence since Pop had discovered he was a thief. She asked him, "Did you come to give yourself up?" "What do you mean? I ain't done nothing wrong." "Maybe you don't think it's wrong," George told him, "but I certainly think stealing is a criminal offense." Ben flared up. "What the heck do you mean? I didn't steal nothing. Pop gave me the pony." "I'm not talking about the pony," George said. "How about the money you took from the other cowboys?" The man glared at her. "I didn't steal nothing, I tell you," he exclaimed. "And don't you or nobody else accuse me of being a thief." He was so vehement in his denial that George began to wonder if Pop Hamilton were wrong. Since no one had seen the theft, it was possible some stranger had sneaked into the bunkhouse and taken the money at about the time Ben had left. Range said, "We'll give you the benefit of the doubt. Now tell us what you want." Ral did not reply. Instead, he pulled a sealed letter from his pocket and handed it to George. She read aloud, "From Roger Payne, to whom it may concern." The two couples were astounded. At once, they demanded to be told where Roger Payne was. "I don't know," Ben replied. "Honest, I don't." "How did you get this note from him?" George asked. "I didn't," Ben answered. "A messenger brought it to me." Bess wanted to know why he had brought the note to them. Why wasn't it sent to his parents? Ben said he had been told to deliver it to Nancy Drew or someone in her group. "And that's all I know," he shouted angrily. "Don't ask me any more questions." Then, as an afterthought, he added, "If Roger's family or his friends or any of you people get any funny notions in your heads about hunting for him, there'll be trouble. I was told to give you that message, too." "How did you know where we were?" Bess asked. "I trailed you," he replied. George now examined the envelope thoroughly. On it was printed, "The person who bears the answer to this note must come alone and unarmed. He will meet Ben at this spot." Chuck and Range began to question Ben about this. Range said, "I suppose you're being well paid to do this job." Ben shouted at him, "That's none of your business, and you better not be so snoopy." Chuck said, "Ben, you could get into a heap of trouble over this. Aren't you afraid you might be arrested?" For a brief second, the ex-cowboy looked frightened. Finally, he said, "No, I ain't. I got friends. They'll protect me." George asked him, "Suppose you should be followed from here by unfriendly riders. What would you do?" This time there was no question but that Ben was frightened. Turning on his heel, he ran off quickly through the wood. At the edge of it, he jumped onto his pony and raced away. Chuck said, "Shall we chase him?" Both Bess and George thought this would be the wrong thing to do, and Bess added, "We have the note. Right now that seems to be the important thing. Let Pop Hamilton attend to Ben." A discussion followed as to who should open the note. "Should we save it for Nancy?" Bess asked. "Or how about Pop Hamilton?" George said this would be all right, but the boys felt that they should take the note to the police. "That will take a long time," George said, "and I feel this demands action. It says on the envelope, 'To whom it may concern.' We're concerned. Why don't we open it?" The others agreed, and Bess slid one finger under the pasted flap. She pulled out a small sheet of paper. "What does it say?" George asked. Bess read aloud, "To get my freedom, I must hand over my plane and $4,000. Bring the money to Ben Rowell at the Buffalo Spring on Thursday morning. If the police are notified, I will be killed. Roger Payne." End of chapter 14.